Let us talk about Donald Trump's very haphazard economic war on China that has ostensibly ended already in defeat. I wanted to pull up a transcript of a Time magazine interview of Donald Trump's first 100 days. And I'm just going to scroll down to the section where they talk about China. Of course, he's been wondering when he's going to get a call from Xi Jinping. So they ask him, will you call President Xi if he doesn't call you? Trump says no. You won't? He says, nope. Has he called you yet? Yep. When did he call you? He's called, and I don't think it's a sign of weakness on his behalf. But would you think it's a sign of weakness if you called him and then no real answer? But this is what he had to say. What did Xi Jinping say? So Trump says, if people want to, well, we all want to make deals, but I am this giant store. It's a giant, beautiful store, and everybody wants to go shopping there. And on behalf of the American people, I own the store, and I set the prices. And I'll say, if you want to shop here, that is what you have to pay. And then, of course, they ask about Secretary of Treasury Scott Bessent about how this trade war is unsustainable. And he says, oh, I agree. You mean the way it is now? But then he goes over to this, the current moment they had to clarify with Trump. And he says, well, no, it's not sustainable. They won't do any business here because at 145% tariffs, it's going to be very rare to see business. Please, your reaction to what has been a real magnanimous defeat on the part of the Trump administration with its economic war. And what did you learn on your trip to China regarding this, BRICS, anything that you want to talk about regarding this economic war, please?
Well, if you ask anybody across the global majority, do you want to shop in that big store in the US? 98% of the people are going to tell you, no. Shop for what? There's nothing to buy. And what there is to buy is imported from basically China and Asia. So, but that's Trump. We're talking about, we're not talking about reality, first of all. We are talking about reality show. And we are talking about narratives and interlocked narratives that change, as he twists his fingers. He doesn't even remember what he said 5 minutes ago. So and what was fascinating, one of the most striking things in Shanghai, by 3 or 4 days in Shanghai, everybody that I was talking to across the spectrum, business people, academics, people at Guanxia, the best website for news and analysis in China, people in the streets, people living in model quarters, those residences during Maoist era and organized by the local party with that lady in the party taking care of the entrance, all that. And obviously, they are very, very curious and eager to talk to foreigners because for a long time, Shanghai, because of COVID and then after Omicron and lockdowns, etc., was isolated and self-isolated as well. And it was fascinating to see that how they look at Trump really as a giant circus ringmaster. They don't put it this way, of course, but this is how they see it. And the way he has been mocked across those zillions of platforms on social media, not only Weibo and TikTok, but there are countless platforms that most of them I never heard before going back to China, like basically mocked as the emperor of tariffs and as a circus clown, essentially. And then when you start talking seriously with academics, for instance, and you start to read the analysis of some of the best professors from Tsinghua, from Renmin University, from Fudan, most of them published at Guanxia, and the analysis are absolute. They know exactly what's going on in Washington. They know what's going on around Trump's circle. There was an absolutely fabulous essay. I linked to it in my last column, my second column, which came out yesterday. It was published originally in Cultural Horizon, which is probably the number one influential cultural magazine in China. And they analyzed the triangulation at the top of the new administration of Trump 2.0. And they break it down beautifully. They break it down as Trump basically trying to constitute a super establishment, not the old East Coast, New York, Manhattan-based establishment, and the old families, the old American aristocracy, let's put it this way. Money politics around Silicon Valley, where, of course, Musk is very important, but the most important character is that extremely dangerous Peter Thiel. And, of course, the articulation of the new right around J.D. Vance, which, as we all know, is a Peter Thiel creature. So they know exactly what's going on, Danny, and all of you, our audience. So this idea that the U.S. think tanks, and unfortunately, for professional reasons, and maybe with you, Danny, I receive a lot of crap on my inbox from all these think tanks for years, They have no idea how the Chinese read Washington critically and in depth, in a way that is absolutely impossible for these self-described and so-called China experts at these various think tanks simply cannot understand, for instance, how the Politburo works, how Xi Jinping takes his decisions, what's behind really these key concepts of the China dream, community of a shared future for mankind, rejuvenation of China. They simply don't understand what they mean. And you have to crack the code to understand China. These people are incapable of cracking these codes. So what do you have? You have stuff like, I'll give you an example. I bought this thing in Hong Kong. Of course, you cannot buy this book in China. It's Oxford University Press. And it's written by two Oxford scholars who live in the UK for a long time, for decades. Obviously, Rhodes scholars, MI6, all that crap. From the School of Oriental and African Studies, SOAS, which everybody knows is basically an MI6 vehicle. And they try to do, and if they speak Chinese, they write in Chinese, but they still cannot crack Xi. And in the end, the so-called analysis is, he's building a totalitarian state and he's posing as the ultimate dictator. Because he wants Xi Jinping thought to be as important or even more important than Mao Zedong's thought. And this passes for analysis by top Oxford scholars. So it's a joke. But the other way around is serious. And of course, and the Chinese analysts, they do not underestimate American power. They try to understand how the system works, which is a sign of intellectual honesty from their part, and to try to enlighten their readers on, look, our enemy, because now it's the enemy, the system works like this, and this is what they want. And after these conversations, and for instance, talking with Professor Zhang Weiwei that you met, Danny, he's fantastic, not only because of his experience, the fact that he knows the West very well, but how he conceptualized the concept of civilization state and applying to Xi Jinping thought, let's put it this way, and how do they merge and all that. This is so sophisticated, but on a level that completely escapes US think tank land. And when you mix these cultural analysis with the economic analysis of some of the best Chinese economists, so they know exactly what they're doing. There is a consensus around the Chinese response, the official Chinese response, by the Minister of Foreign Affairs, by the Minister of Commerce, which, by the way, a few days ago, in the beginning of the week, they said, no, there are no talks whatsoever. Basically, the Ministry of Commerce of China is saying that Trump is propagating fake news. Of course, in a very Chinese, very polite way, they said, no, this is not true at all. There are zero contacts. So this, let's say, is slightly more polite than that famous one 2 weeks ago when I was in Shanghai 2 weeks ago, when they started to describe Trump as a barbarian. And that went viral all over the net. And the official definition, this one came by one of the spokesmen of the Ministry of Foreign Affairs. A tariff-wielding barbarian cannot expect China to pick up the phone and make a phone call. And this went mega viral. And on the net, on the social platforms, you see mockery, but with lots of sense of humor. Trump turns into an endearing character because he's so outlandish that they actually become affectionate towards him, But to see all that live in front of you is an enormous shock, because all through these years, starting from the 80s and the 90s, when there were the four dragons and China was behind, and then after the entry in the WTO in the beginning of the 2000s, and then growing at 14%, and then the beginning of Xi Jinping, Chinese policy and Chinese foreign policy was very polite, was mostly passive and reactive. But now they are on the offensive. Why? Because Trump managed to do, I would say, the impossible, to antagonize 1.4 billion Chinese at the same time. And there's no turning back. Once again, because it's something that all of us who follow China know. You can do anything with China except treat them with disrespect. And the way the tariff tizzy, let's put it this way, was interpreted everywhere, starting from the DD taxi driver all the way to the Politburo, is that he treated the Chinese nation and Chinese people with extreme disrespect. And this cannot pass. This won't stand. So the response so far, it's consensual. Of course, they know the challenges. Xi Jinping, in his 2 weeks ago, he was doing a tour of Southeast Asia. For instance, some of the interlocutors, it's complicated. For instance, he went to Malaysia, Vietnam, and Cambodia. Cambodia, of course, lots of foreign direct investment from China. In many aspects, you can say that the Cambodian economy is a Chinese colony. You can say that. Vietnam is different. Vietnam, they are always hedging their bets between US and China. And Malaysia, with Anwar, which is an excellent prime minister, very much respected in Russia, for instance, close to Putin, but also respected by Xi Jinping. Malaysia, look, we have to be neutral, essentially. But at the same time, we have to have a common ASEAN position. That's what Anwar told Xi, which is exactly what Xi was telling Anwar. We have to fight this as a group. So when you see that in the ASEAN 10, the number one trade partner for all 10 members of the ASEAN is China. So obviously they have to fight the tariffs as a group. And some will be suffering more than others, and China will help them, of course. And even the ones who are more independent, like Vietnam, the position fighting the tariffs will be more or less the same. So Trump cannot expect a phone call from China. It's absolutely impossible because of the way he turned this into a sort of mafia operation once again. It's going to be the way I want it, or following the spectacular, misguided Miran plan, the guy who came up with the Mar-a-Lago agreement, basically saying, look, there are two options for all of you, and that from China and everybody else. You can pay the tariffs without complaining, And that's it. And there's no other option, essentially. So what kind of dialogue is inbuilt in all that? It's impossible. But it was great to see live in Shanghai the response from all sectors of society, and at the same time, reflecting their newfound pride of, number one, there won't be another century of humiliation, very, very important, and no humiliation whatsoever, starting with this one, which is they considered an enormous attempt at humiliating China. And at the same time, let's constitute China as, we can say, a sort of vanguard or one of the leaders of a united front. When I heard the first time the term united front, I said, wow, this is Mao all over again, upgraded. Mao was talking about the united front as early as in the late 50s already, especially in the 60s. And also the one that when I heard the first time, was outstanding, Paper Tiger. Paper Tiger is back. And once again, first time that Mao talked about Paper Tiger was related to Chiang Kai-shek, was still in the 50s. But in the 60s, many of us who were teenagers in the 60s, like my generation, we remember Paper Tiger applied by people in May 68 in France, Godard movies, liberation movies in Latin America. The definition of the American empire is the American empire is a paper tiger. This came straight from Mao, all over. And now they're using paper tiger all over again and say, look, if they were a paper tiger in the 60s, can you imagine now? So it was fascinating to see these adaptations of Maoist thought and Maoist metaphors and images, So they are doing their homework. They're doing their homework for the past few decades. They're looking at the continuum. They understand how the empire is desperate because of Chinese power. And when you look in front of you at these intimations of especially high-tech finesse, it's no wonder that the empire is desperate. Danny, I went to test a Huawei Mate 70 Pro Plus, which is definitely the best smartphone on the planet. Anyway, it's absolutely mind-boggling, in fact. But then I was talking to the geek, a wonderful geek girl. She said, look, it's complicated for you to use this in the West. There is a trick. We, among us, we have a Chinese app. We could give it to you. If you download this Chinese app, which is more or less underground, then you can download a lot of stuff, including Google, etc. But it's risky. So that's why for us Western barbarians, it's very complicated to have a Huawei phone operating in the Harmony OS system, But when you look at the actual product, I say, everybody else, Apple is going to come up with something like this maybe in 10 years, if ever. And of course, all those outstanding SUVs, which when you get inside, it's like you are in a cinema with 4K, completely unbelievable. And of course, everything else. They have now a new high-speed train, 400 kilometers an hour between Beijing and Shanghai, which they started to test this past few days. Orders for their new commercial airliner, a thorium-based nuclear, you name it, everything. So it is very, very impressive, all that. And always comes back to the impotence of the empire looking at all that. Okay, so what are we going to do? Okay, let's tariff them. Let's clobber them.